Programmers of Reddit. What's the most unrealistic request a client ever had? Story 1. Client had a factory that makes rectangular sheets of stuff at different sizes that their customers order. Client requested and contracted us for a software that integrates with their accounting software and allows him to schedule jobs onto their sheet cutting machines. Never was any kind of automation mentioned. Estimated, planned, functional spec document written, signed, developed, tested, approved, billed, customer then reports a bug that won. The software does not automatically schedule the jobs too, and therefore cannot automatically find the perfect job schedule that minimizes the time needed and the waste clippings. Demands that we develop this feature as a bug fix. Dude, we wrote the functional spec document. You signed it. FSDs are very thorough and a legal contract in this country. What you have is an interesting computer science problem, and I'd love to tackle it. But this is a rather complex feature you suddenly want. You better pay me. And no, it's not an easy fix because the computer has to do just one additional thing. Yes, they actually said that. Story 2. In 2007, I was working as an interface design consultant, but I'm also a software developer for a GIS startup, and they kept doing the usual client thing of making a million changes despite my suggestions. And eventually they got pissed that the project was taking too long. Wonder why. Their solution was to bring in a consulting CTO. He was a super furry 50s dude who fell asleep in meetings with his micro laptop on his stomach. And in one meeting, he kept demanding that we make it so users could drag the image of the map to Outlook, where it transforms into a spreadsheet of data. I politely tried to push back 3 or 4 times we could make an email this button, and he kept insisting why not my way, and I eventually snapped and said, because the internet doesn't work that way. I was fired. Although it was a web app, hence my internet comment. Story 3. Not really a client, but a student at my university had a great idea and asked me to create a deep learning model to correctly predict the future stock market. Of course, he would be CEO, and I'd be the coding monkey. Story 4. I worked with a programmer, and a client once came and asked for him to create the new big social network. No ideas, just explained that he wanted something like Facebook, but not exactly it, and that he would pay once he started making money. Needless to say, he rejected the proposal. Story 5. I used to get occasional requests for capturing the email addresses of people visiting their sites without them knowing, and everyone still wants to be number 1 in the search engines for generic search terms. Sure, business that just started a year ago that maybe 1,000 people have ever heard of, it'll get right to work getting your site to the number 1 search result position for shoes. What vexes me, but is at least understandable, is the number of people who don't know the difference between front-end designer and back-end developer. To them, it's all 20-hour web design. Story 6. I want this sorted by city and name. Okay, done. The names aren't in order. Have you ever tried to explain to a not-so-bright C-level that there could be a Jones in Atlanta and a Brown in Seattle? And there's no way to have both of those in order without insulting them. Story 7. Back when databases were becoming more prevalent, I was working for university in the IT department. The president of the university got all his technological information from Time magazine. I'm not kidding. Now, he was actually a really intelligent guy, but he just did not understand the nuances of technology. Everyone at the university seemed to be afraid of him and afraid to tell him when he misunderstood something. I'm not sure why. So, in a meeting with him and a bunch of other people from IT, we were discussing a new advancement fundraising system. I was the DBA because the real DBA had just quit. I wasn't officially a DBA, but I knew more about databases than anyone else. We talked for a while about requirements, and the president suddenly says he wants the database to have 100 tables. No more, no less. Everyone gets quiet and looks at me. My boss, who is is actually smiling because he thinks I want to know how to handle this. So I asked the president why he only wants the database to have 100 tables. He says that he read an article in Time again, not kidding, that said a lot of database design was over-engineered and thus inefficient. So I took the opportunity to educate him about how databases are designed. I explained that the first step was to build the database in a completely normalized structure. I explained to him that this meant there was no duplicate data in any table other than the pointers that link data in one table to another foreign keys. I said this design could make the database fat and possibly inefficient. Then I told him the next step was to write the code that pulled data from the database. I told him by monitoring this code and how long it took to run, I could see where the database was inefficient, and I could tell where to denormalize a duplicate data in some tables to make the code run faster. At this point, my boss was shaking his head and almost laughing because he was sure I had put my foot in my mouth by explaining the process in such detail. The president was listening to me intently. I finished up by saying that by denormalizing the data, we would have to make sure duplicate data was updated in every table it occurred in, or we'd risk having data out of sync. But that was really no big deal and wouldn't impact performance much. When I finished, the whole room was silent. My boss started to tell the president that we would absolutely build the database with 100 tables and that he would supervise me to make sure I knew what I was doing and didn't go against what the president wanted. I was crushed. I knew my boss was in, but I didn't think he'd be such a toady when it meant problems down the road for everyone involved. To my delight, the president told my boss he'd do no such thing. He said I knew what I was doing, and he trusted me to build him an efficient database. I was both delighted and terrified. I knew my boss would use this against me at some point. When the meeting let out, the president left first, and my coworkers from IT surrounded me and said they couldn't believe I stood up to the president of the university. My boss did try to backstab me later on. His boss told him to make me the official DBA. He did, but he tried to tell me that my upcoming performance review would have to be done on my new job description, and it was unlikely to be a good one if I accepted the position of DBA. I responded that I didn't even have a current, written job description, and neither did the old DBA who quit. So I wasn't sure how he could justify doing my performance based on something that didn't exist yet. He assured me that is what would happen. In my job at the university, to that point, I had worked with every single department in the university, including the legal department. I made an appointment with the university attorney. I explained to him that I wasn't really as qualified for the DBA job as someone they could get from the outside, and if the university didn't want to take the position, I would gladly decline, but I was concerned about my boss' threats to evaluate me on a position I was just given. He listened and told me that I was offered the position by someone boss who was authorized to offer it to me, and to not worry. A month later, my boss was fired. It turns out I was not the only one he tried it with, and many other people had complained. When they started to investigate, they found he'd spent way more budget money than he could account for or justify. Story 8, I have a billion-dollar idea for a video game. Could you have it done by the end of next week? I cannot give you anything now, but I will give you 5 cuts of final profit. Met him in public, then avoided forever. Story 9, the most common unrealistic request will always be timescale. It's always critical reports or bugs that need to be fixed yesterday. Normally they go on to say it's been like this for 6 months, but no one has told us until now. Story 10, I am a programmer. Always wanted to be one though. More of a hobbyist, with Excel VBA being the lingua franca of office wizards. I was the resident hey, could you make it do this wizard? Munging data and whatnot. One day a hey buddy request rolls through for a schedule of 30 employees and duty assignments. The request was for random. Don't start coming at me with pseudo-random never truly being random. I get it. Anyways, I explained I could make a close approximation to random, but it is an odd thing to ask for, and wanted to know why. Employees were complaining of unfairness with the assigning of tasks and wanted to be more random. I explained that statistically random requires a very large sample, and a random algorithm might put an employee on the same task a time or two in a row or even every other iteration. This being that random isn't fair. Random is random. Well, that's not acceptable. So I continue to pick their brains trying to figure out what exactly it is they do want. Eventually, I come to realize they want a 30-man traveling salesman solution with multiple visits and visit load balancing. Mind you, I'm a dweeb with an Excel spreadsheet and my own absolutely not related to coding job to do. I laugh out loud. And nope, right out of there. Eventually, they decide they will take me up on my idea of random to see how it goes. Big Mysticino good deed goes unpunished. I have fun. Seeding the random function with the now function. Put the names from the list in a reasonably random to my humanized schedule of duty assignments. I hand it off to Mr. Hey buddy and assume all is well. 2 weeks later, people come to me complaining that MY silly wizardry isn't random and I have no idea what I'm doing. Q imposter syndrome anxiety. I mentioned that 2 weeks is only 14 iterations and too soon for them to see a pattern, and that 365-day iterations is still a small sample size. Then one person says they've been on the same task for all 2 weeks, and that isn't fair or random. Oh gods, what did I miss? Come to find out that Mr. Hey Buddy would generate a random assignment, then go and revise the assignments because Sally is a bad back or HR wants us to keep Fred and George separate. Also, one person is a star worker, and we need them in the one task because they can handle the extra load and the others fail to keep up. I mentioned it isn't random if he changes the outcome. He says that's okay. He can just blame the macro. I now hate the words random and fair. Edit a sentence. Best proofreading is done after submit post send. Story 11, right before I quit my job partially because of this, I was given an assignment for a different group in the company. No problem. I went to set up a meeting with the team in charge to get the specs, and was told they were off-site for 2 weeks. No problem. Let's meet when you get back. Next day, my manager asks, how far along are you? None. The meeting is scheduled for date. Well, get started. You don't have to know what they want to start, do you? This was a large software company too. Yeah, sure, I'll start writing a random app for them with no idea what they want. I never really programmed a professional since, but I've done some stuff for free here and there. It's amazing how people can have an idea and want something, but not be able to clearly outline exactly what they want. It's like trying to pull teeth from a herd of cats. I can't magically know you want the information uploaded to a website unless you tell me. And when I ask if you want it uploaded to a website and you say no, then that may change the way I write the program and store data. Now you want it to be uploaded to a website, and I have to redesign a bunch of, I don't ask you questions about the project just for fun. I ask them because, well, I don't want to make a program that doesn't do the stuff you want it to do, but I need to know what you want it to do, something you perceive as a small change, maybe a really big change when it comes to incorporating it into a program, especially if it's almost completed. TLDR, most unrealistic thing is to read someone's mind and figure out what they want in a program. Story 12 them, make it so when people land on the site, they automatically download the sample of the product and automatically email it to everyone in their contacts, who will then automatically do the same thing to their contacts, me. So you want me to create a virus, them, and no, not a virus. They will still be able to turn on their computers. It's viral marketing. It's what all the success story companies do. Needless to say, I did not end up working with this person. Story 13, I took over a job once where the client said the last dev spent a few months getting the server set up and now wanted me to fetch the game data from there by the user's Facebook login. Easy enough, except when I want to figure out what data was in the server already and what kind of API it had, I couldn't find anything. Turns out the last guy billed months of work, but just set up an FTP server on an AWS box. Thankfully, the client was understanding when I said that it was pretty much impossible for me to get that done in a time frame if there was no backend setup at all. We ended up using a commercial service that is pretty much already set up for it. Story 14, a guy wanted a web browser, like Internet Explorer, only there is no back button because research has shown that that is the button that people use the most. Yes, I don't see the logic either. The other functionalities would be also done in some weird way. I would be working alone on it, and he can't pay me until later when the thing starts bringing in money. Story 15, I have a few interesting ones. One place I got hired, and without giving me any kind of onboarding or overview of their system, asked me to do an absolutely massive project, the entire front end, so average marketing users could properly use an operational research solver type thing to manage their ads. The deadline was in 3 days. The thing had to be done from scratch and be production ready for multi-million-dollar contracts with famous companies. Yeah, no. Another was a designer who complained that I wasn't following her mock-ups a few years back, that I wasn't using the right color code because two things were supposed to be the same color and weren't. I pulled the hex codes from her mock-up to show her the colors were indeed different. We had a bunch of high-end monitors that were calibrated for printing, all distinctly showing the difference. Oh, you're not using a Mac. On a Mac, the colors are supposed to be the same. Yeah, sure, calibrate a real monitor, and we'll talk again. Story 16, I can't find the video on YouTube part of the skit. Is customer, we want you to make us 7 lines. All of them perpendicular programmer, okay. Perpendicular to what? Customer each other programmer. That's how the laws of math work. Boss, then just ignore the laws of math. Problem solve customer, and we want one of the lines to be in the shape of a cat. Story 17, somebody with only the most basic knowledge of HTML requested that my husband do about 3 months worth of programming in C with the CUDA platform in 24 hours for $50 and then teach the guy how to do it himself as well, since I know it's easy even though I don't know how to do it yet. Story 18, I've been asked a couple of times to solve the halting problem. Just check if the script will terminate and don't let them save it if it doesn't or some variation of it. Story 19, could you have a non-programmer do it? I hate programmers. They often use custom code to lock in the platform and give themselves job security. I've experienced anti-programmer sentiment quite a few times since I started my career, which isn't something I knew existed before. Story 20, while I was in search for an internship, and there was this remote one posted online giving 100,014 rupees for a month. All he wanted was a fully functional clone of Coursera with hosted on AWS with videos of around 2 to 3 terabytes streaming from S3 in a month. I asked him about his AWS costs, and he replied, use the internship money I'm giving you, it won't cost much. Story 21, the presidential council of a college requested that I write a clone of Microsoft Office over a weekend, so they didn't need to license it for all their computers. It is just drag and dropping some components onto a form according to them. This was back in 2003-ish, mind you. Story 22, self-diagnostics and fault detection. I work in embedded systems. Pretty much every system I worked on came with a requirement for self-diagnostics and fault detection. The plan sounded entirely reasonable in the conference room, and when tested in the lab, appeared to work correctly once the units got out in the field. The most common cause of failure was a false positive reaction to some unexpected edge case that triggered an automatic shutdown. The units got a reputation for being unreliable, and sales suffered little by little. Tolerances were loosened, and error checking was turned off until acceptable reliability was achieved. Yes, it's possible to do self-diagnosis and fault detection, but it's way harder than most people realize when they ask for it. Story 23, I want you to recreate Snapchat, but want some really small feature. Yup, you wanted a single developer to recreate a huge mobile app that took years to develop. Story 24, build my website. Okay, sure. I have a few questions to get the process started. Look, guy, just build a website. Doesn't matter what it looks like, just get it done. Okay, cool. A week later, here's the website. Guy, this is not what I asked for. And how come you haven't done me a logo or produced photos of my products? And how come there is weird Spanish on the page instead of content? Are you actually a web designer? Story 25, I suppose it's not really unrealistic, but I used to do front-end development for a company that did e-commerce sites, mostly for wholesalers of electrical and plumbing supplies. I had a client that wanted an animated guy to run across the screen and put stuff in a cart every time a user clicked the Add to Cart button. This was maybe 2 years ago, not the 90s. I was not going to do this. I quoted him like 20 hours at $200 per hour, and he stopped asking. He also typed every email in all caps, so I did not feel bad. Story 26, I worked at a company that produced networking equipment for ISPs. One customer once told us that they considered a network device dropping a packet to be the equivalent of an airplane dropping a passenger out of the cabin. This was supposed to impress us about how fastidious they were. Instead, it only made me wonder why they weren't paying 9 figures per unit. Story 27, I'm a third-year CS student, and last year we had to pick our minors. Some startup company was developing a robot and thought it'd be a good idea to have some CS students on their team. I read their flyer, and the project sounded pretty interesting. Their goal was to create an underwater robot which needed image processing to identify different species of fish. I followed some image processing classes and thought it'd be cool to work on that. So I arranged to meet up with them. I meet with them. They show up late. Apparently, they're students too, mechanical engineering and electrical engineering. We talk, and it appears that they wrote complete BS on their flyer. What they were asking for was to program their theoretical robot. The robot didn't exist at this point. For months before the miner is supposed to start to determine if submarine communication cables were laid correctly. They explained to me that it should be able to swim to the bottom of the ocean. It know where it is. It should use image processing to determine if the cable was oriented correctly, and it should swim back up. Software needed to be embedded, and it had to work on batteries. Oh, and they weren't planning on testing the thing either. Just drop it in a swimming pool once or twice to see if it resurfaces or not. No payment either because, it'd be my minor project. I'd also be the only software engineer in the team, and it had to be done in 3 months. Needless to say, I decided not to go with them. Story 28, the only people who will understand this without a ton of explanation will be those who know about reports to print it on fanfold green bar, 132 characters per line. My user wanted 200 characters of data per line. Find 2 reports in perfect sync with left and right in the heading. Then he asked if I could make sure the folds are the same on both reports. Story 29, this isn't a programming request, but happened a few years ago. Some background before I state what the request was. We have a testing site not too far from our main office, but located in the middle of the woods. The head of our testing department came into IT, requesting that we put wireless in the middle of the woods, so they could be connected while testing. After explaining the difficulties required to do such a task, having to run fiber and electrical out to the woods, the distance was greater than 500 feet from the nearest network switch, let alone the environmental challenges with having electronic equipment outside. His response was, well, just put the wireless access point in a plastic box. Our infrastructure manager had a glazed look on his face. Story 30, can you make the inventory find rooms that don't have computers in them? They wanted a program that pulled automatic inventory info from machines like what room they were described as being in. They also wanted the program to pull room numbers without machines from 50 buildings without a list of existing room numbers. Story 31 developer here. I would recommend always adding a management fee. I usually take a base of 10 to 20 in my original quote. In my experience, people are more happy to pay the management fee, which you have to do anyway, than the actual work, as they feel they have already paid for the work and only made one change. If I have a reel, I have a bunch of alias emails such as Alice and Jim, and will purposely say, just email Jim. Obviously, I'm all these people, but it makes it easier to defuse tension. Story 32 early days of web development. Project for a big aerospace company. We were sad with the awful out of date IE4 as the company browser. tried to explain that a particular feature simply wasn't supported without a browser upgrade and was told to contact Microsoft and tell them to make it work. When I explained that weren't likely to meet with much success, the response was, "But where are the joy of working for a big fish in a small pond?" Story 33 once had a VP tell me he wanted me to write some code that would make a lot of money for our company. I asked, "Can you be more specific?" "No, just write something that will make a lot of money." Story 34, I started a contract, and the CEO wanted the website live in a week. I was the only devy employed and hired me without interviewing me, just from my resume. I explained sites like this take a team of 6 people 3 months to deliver. When I was walking home, the agency called me and asked how was the role. I said the guy is completely delusional and has no concept of the effort involved in development. He said they don't want you back as you're not good enough and refused to pay my contract notice period over performance issues. Story 35, I took a C programming class in high school a long time ago. I'm old. The teacher was a nice guy and good with computers, but not a programmer at all. He was basically learning along with us. At the end of the year, our final exam, to be completed in 2 hours, was to write a grade tracking application for teachers to use to manage their classes. Unsurprisingly, none of us got very far with it in that time period. Thankfully, the teachers seemed to realize in hindsight how ridiculous the assignment had been, and everyone who legitimately tried got an A on it. Story 36, I'm an Illustrator animator only. My uncle requested I set up a personal PayPal alternative on his site. I'm still trying to figure out how to wrap my brain around the leaps it took to go from illustrate something for me to please invent and program a brand new banking system. Story 37, when I was in my first year of college, I found a job advert for a summer job as web developer. Basically, the client wanted a platform on which he and his own clients could upload files. The content of his site needed to be able to be updated, etc. Basically, the guy wanted a CMS in a month, wanted to pay as little as possible for it by hiring somewhat inexperienced developers. And I didn't know, the entire thing was unrealistic as Story 38 started a new consulting job as a development team lead. The initial development was 80 done with hundreds of bugs logged and growing daily. Launch is in 3 weeks. Get it done, say the client executives on my first day, handing me all these defects. The thing is that we didn't own the data. We only displayed it for customer service staff. Very quickly, I noted that lots of the bugs had to do with data, not as expected. I also noted that after we fixed effects, they often reappeared in new ways. After some calls and networking, I found the people who owned the data. They told me they were in development and wouldn't be live for 9 months, yet the front end was due in 3 weeks. The fun never ends. Story 39 saw this. Somewhere else, client asked developer to create an application that can change the wallpaper of the phone base on the color of the case. Dev asked client, "Can you provide the hardware?" Client says, "What hardware?" "Just a normal kind of phone case. Any case will be fine." Dev asked, "Then how is the application supposed to know what color the case is?" Client says, "How to do? I know you're the developer. You figured out." Developer says, "You think a mobile app is a dog. You tech it sits." Story 40 guy approached me with his algorithm to beat Wall Street. He had theories about how the stock market went up and down. He could beat the system if he bought and sold at the right times. He had formulas in MS Excel. He wanted me to put them into code, so he can do this with a click of a button. I told him it would cost him thousands of dollars for me to write custom code, to interact with stock market APIs. He just didn't understand why I'm asking for so much, when he could get MP3 software for free at his API application programming interface. Basically a way to interact with a program or website. Story 41, it should be like Windows Outlook, but on mobile with a backend of Novell email, but based on passing around very large XML files. Don't worry, you'll do the Novell part. This was 2002. The spec that was sold was a single-page contract, really. Story 42, not a client, but a directive came down from our internal security compliance team to encrypt all of our data at rest, to check off some regulatory compliance checkboxes. This is fine. And I had great news for them. Microsoft had already solved this problem. TD, transparent data encryption, which is the proper layer to do this on. You set it up, and the data is now encrypted at rest. Done, with no adjustments to existing code, and it would certainly be more secure to use the work done by the team of math PhDs at Microsoft than to rely on whatever homegrown thing I, working by myself, would come up with since I had no experience with encryption. However, inexplicably, the second team wanted me to do it at a code level, encrypting decrypting data as it was written read. By this point, I'd already been deploying custom in-house solutions for almost 10 years, so this would be a lot of work to go back and redo the data layer for everything. As soon as you can't see your data with a standard SQL query, you have to think about it completely differently. So, a ton of work. I asked for help in terms of additional developers, but got denied. I was on my own, so I gave a somewhat aggressive timeline of 6 months to complete the retrofitting. This sounded like an inconvenience to them. With their now burned into my brain response, we'll put down 6 months, but let us know if you could get it done any sooner. That was the last straw. I fought this battle a while by this point, but ultimately, it was not going to go in my favor. The next conference call with the second team was later that week, but I have no idea how the call went. I resigned that morning, an hour before the call, ending an 11-year tenure at an otherwise good company. Story 43, not a programmer, but we outsource jobs like that. Had this dude show up at 5 p.m. as I was leaving the office, go back upstairs and start this meeting. He wants us to make an app that is similar to Booking.com for holidays and hotels and whatever. He wants it to function like Booking, look like Booking, same colors as Booking, same menu layout as Booking. Even loads up the Booking app and starts answering my questions by describing the app to me. Wanted to call it hotel booking or some stupid. He ended up never replying to our quote. So that guy that our software have no bugs. The math was weak in that one. Story 44, I worked for a few months for a company that had an old approach to software with a new twist. Instead of changing the software specs merely a lot before we got done, they changed the specs completely at every single meeting. I am not kidding. Have a meeting to finalize the specs, and they would change from the ground up. We went through 8 program managers before I rage quit. We had a young genius as the CEO. Nothing against young people, but just because someone is young does not mean they're on the cutting edge. Sometimes they're dumb as a sack of hammers. After $17 million was literally wasted, so many people left the company that the board just had the parent company absorb what was left and hopefully bury the CEO. Story 45, management once wanted me to produce a list of life insurance policy customers who would die in the next 3 months. They didn't phrase it like that, of course, but essentially that was what they were asking for. For beneficiaries of high-value policies, say 1M, there are some benefits to pushing the claim into the next year. So some years we would get hit with a bunch of 1M claims in January. This would obviously have a negative impact on the quarterly report. To mitigate that, management wanted to know ahead of time what possible high-value claims we could expect in January. Immediately, there's a problem here. If we know about the claim, we know the person died. If we don't know about the claim, how do we know whether the policyholder is dead or alive? Are we supposed to check on everyone weekly? Theoretically, I said that it might be possible. If we had a list of high-value policies, we could perhaps scan news feeds for obituaries or something similar. It didn't seem like a good idea to send wealthy customers an email at the end of the year asking, "Are you dead? SP, perhaps we could have some report available in like mid to late December." Well, that's no good, they said. We need the report at the end of the third quarter in order to make the financial adjustments. So I said, you need a report at the end of September detailing all of our high-value customers who have died so far this year or are going to die in October, November, or December. Yes, exactly. Can you do it? If I wouldn't be working here, I didn't actually say that. Story 46, in the mid-00s, I did some freelance websites. A lady hired me to build a site for her tiny 2-employee accounting business. She was okay with a no-frills design, but she did want an e-commerce store to sell a few bits and pieces, e.g. MYOB ebook. She stressed that she wanted it cheap, like 300 cheap. To keep the cost down, I just tweaked a freeware CSS template to her design and slapped in one of those plug-and-play web stores, standard operating procedure for small business sites. She nitpicked and wanted things revised dozens of times, but thought that 300 was more than enough for anything she wanted. Most customers were a pain, but she set the bar. I really should have charged her 10 times that. We caught up for coffee to wrap things up. I handed over keys, so to speak, passwords, itemized invoice, user guide on adding new products to the web store, etc. As she paid me, she said, I had some ideas to expand a bit. How much would it cost for you to make me something like eBay? She seriously wanted to turn her basic website for her tiny little accounting business, run out of her own home in the suburbs, into an eBay competitor, and she wanted me to do it for $1,000. When I explained why that was bonkers, she rattled off a bunch of other half-baked ideas until I finally got away. She could see that the web was exploding and wanted to cash in, but didn't have any decent idea of how to. 2 years later, she called me again. She had lost the passwords, both paper and electronic copies. Told her sorry, but I don't keep customer passwords. A little bit of karma, I think. Story 47, this was from a large enterprise IT company marketing department with billions. We want you to make us a virtual reality app. We want our staff to be able to collaborate on customer problems in virtual reality using a post-it board, to create and upload videos about customer stories, and to have voice over IP support. Also, it needs to support 25,000 users. Also, it needs to run on thin clients. Also, it needs to be ready in 3 months so we can show this at a conference. Also, you mean we have to buy 25,000 virtual reality headsets? Me, okay. How many 3D apps can you run simultaneously on your thin client server? Please test this out with a 3D app and get back to me. It takes them 3 weeks to do this and get back to me. Time is ticking if we're going to hit that deadline. That's 3 weeks of development time I could have used. I also offered a really generous quote of $265,000 for the first phase, which I realistically should have probably doubled. I was a subcontractor, so when I gave that to my prime, they bricks about the price bunch of amateurs who don't know the cost of software development. TLDR essentially. These people are asking for an MMO in VR with VoIP, running on thin clients, to be delivered in 3 months. I ultimately declined the project, and they picked some inexperienced Unity guy. It's due October 10th, 2018, and I'm sitting here relaxing, enjoying the show with a smile on my face they're going to miss or get canceled. Story 48. I had someone hire me to illustrate a children's book, and that ID get paid when it was published. That's how the publishing system works, I was told.